I'll leave probably 10 minutes at the end for questions if anybody wants to ask anything specific. You can see a little blurb on me in the bottom right. The prompt for how this came to be was a couple different friends are entrepreneurs, similar to kind of the previous presentation. And one of the hardest things is if you have co-founders at the beginning, you have to do this thing where you're like negotiating for equity with each other before you even have like worked together that much or otherwise, and it has to add up to 100%. So it's one of the toughest conversations that you can have, and potentially has some of the longest impacts to sort of the financial result of the company. So that was sort of the prompt of kind of like a half dozen friends, in the past couple months have asked about stuff like that. So I pulled this together to help with that, and found that it generalized pretty well to a number of to not only entrepreneurship and starting a company and co-founder negotiation, but career, comp, and life as well. So I have about 10 slides. Let's dive in. So life is pretty simple when you get down to it. There's things that you want, and then there's things that are possible. And if we want to apply that to career, and this model comes from Wait But Why, which is one of my favorite blogs, super thoughtful. If you want to think about your career, there's your wants and what's reality. So just going through, the top three on the one side, you think that you might want to just make more money or things like that, but a bunch of other stuff matters. For me, for instance, the people that I work with is the most important thing in any career, person, or anything that I work with, independent of mission, task, or anything. Like, I just want to work with good people. I find that personally rewarding. Second is autonomy. That could be, everybody's gotten a taste of it with Corona. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens when people say you have to go back to the office, right? Like, having geographic and time flexibility is huge. Aside from being lonely all the time, you are able to command your own time and kind of engage with things as you will. So it'll be really interesting to see in a post-Corona world how companies evolve. And I would guess that there will be a lot more working remotely. Third is the classic thing that's always friction, which is compensation. That could be cash, bonus, equity, or otherwise. We'll dive into that a little bit more. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. But I think that it's important to think about all the different things that you could care about, and then at least get a handle on the top like 2 or 3 that you really, really care about, so that you're not trading off things that you don't care about for things that you do care about. Which is to say, if I got paid a lot of money to work with people that I hated, that would not be, at this point in my career, something that I would want to do from a trade-off standpoint. Second is, it's important, reality essentially consists of what's out there in the world. I can think forever in a corner about what I would prefer, but that's going to be a function of what opportunities and what things exist in the world. So 3 top concepts I'd highlight here would be, number 1, it's really important to think through your counterparties, which are who are you talking to on the other side of the table, and what do they care about? If you're talking to an owner, they're going to care about different things than a hiring manager or recruiter. An owner will care about like more revenue, more margin, less cost, things like that. Hiring manager will care about working with someone that they're excited to work with, who's hardworking and smart and coachable, stuff like that. And a recruiter probably just wants to close as many people as they can while hitting like salary bands that that the owner says that they need. Second would be hiring criteria. We can dive into that, but to the extent you can understand the hiring criteria of the other side, you can do a better job of matching them. A common one that most people have is like smart and hardworking, probably need to be competent in the job, but knowing the hiring criteria you're up against helps you a lot better understand whether it's going to be a fit. Third is a concept called BATNA, which is it's this negotiating principle called best alternative to negotiated agreement. And it basically says what's the next best option. So for them, that looks like, for a company, that looks like, if they don't hire you, who else will they hire? Like, who's the second best or who's the third best? If a company has you as the only candidate, that will drive a different decision on their part than if they had 10 candidates that are like clamoring to work for that job. So that's just kind of a glimmer also of thinking through the world of the other person's eyes. And by the way, if you think about this from a standpoint of like, friends, romantic partners, or otherwise, these are not crazy concepts to be thinking about in that context as well, right? But we'll stick to the career side of things. So if you're interviewing for a job or doing kind of doing anything, the fundamentals are pretty straightforward. Your job is to make it obvious that they should do anything to hire you through being competent, friendly, kind, over delivering, stuff like that. And if you're successful in that job, then their job is to make it obvious that you should accept for any of the criteria that you have that are important to you. So one of the things that people oftentimes run into loggerheads with is comp, right? Like the candidate wants more, the company wants to pay less. And so in that case, there's this, how do you handle conflict? And this is like an old model. It's been redone in like 10,000 different times, but that's because it's really good and on point. A lot of times, when there's disagreements, it's usually because two parties have two different positions, different comp amounts that are just not aligned. And the way to resolve that is not to argue, is not to sort of like fight it out and hire a bunch of lawyers and stuff to, have a contentious argument around it. It's much more useful oftentimes to look into what your interests are, what you want, what your needs are, and what you must have, and then match them up with the other person on the other side of the table, and then rebuild alignment in that way. Funnily enough, I was looking around for this model and I found that, the World Health Organization had this posted on their site. There's a book called Getting to Yes. So this model is like all over the place. It's just very difficult to remember to use it whenever you're arguing with someone or it's like emotionally heated or something like that. But that doesn't take away from the timelessness and effectiveness of this. Okay, so that's kind of like the prelude to it's kind of like an overview of things that are important to think through. This is kind of the model that I'd say, I made up and I think is pretty useful and applies a lot of what we just said to finding alignment in pretty much any interaction, but I'm going to focus on a career, like a job negotiation. So it's simple 2x2. There's your perspective, and then there's their perspective, and then there's the world through your eyes, and then there's the world through their eyes. Okay, so let's go through quadrant by quadrant. So first off, the world through your eyes and your perspective. That's basically self-awareness. And I kind of like rank ordered what I think I or most people think about in these things. One is you'd think about what are your expectations. And a lot of times with compensation or role or stuff like that, you have expectations. And it's typically like your history, how much were you paid in your last job? Your peer group. This happens a lot with like business school people where they have like some friend who's making a gajillion dollars. So it's like you deserve that as well. And that sort of thing. Second would be opportunity cost, which is what's your alternative? So if you have 3 offers, that's going to drive a different psychology and choice than if you have just one offer, which means you would have, do whatever you can to take it. And then third would be a lens through yourself of what value do you honestly provide to the other person? What risk do they mitigate? And be brutally honest about this with yourself. You can ask other like friends who are hiring managers. You can even ask the other side, like, what value do they see? Because I think one of the common things, especially early in career, that people make a mistake with is to overvalue their own contributions.
Tuning into this now or
yeah.
tuning in later.
So
do anything. Look up the role.
Someone needs to mute. I'm gonna do that. 1 second. Okay, cool. Okay, so second would be your perspective of the world through their eyes. And that's essentially empathy, right? You're trying to see what they see through their eyes. So thinking that through, it's kind of a different rank order of probably what's most important. The first thing that you probably think they care about is the value needed. So what value do you think that they uniquely need to get from you? And like what risks are mitigated? Second, you might think like, what are their needs? Like, how much do they value this role? Where does it fit in kind of their priority queue of how much do they care? And then last is like the opportunity cost, which is, okay, what other people do they have they could potentially hire? That's kind of a good swag. But if you go to their perspective and the world through their eyes, that's, essentially reality. And as a hiring manager and having done this lots of times, the first thing that matters the most to a company or hiring manager is like, what are the critical roles we're hiring for? And in the Corona world, right? Like, what can we afford? If you're interviewing for a role that's like a tier 5 role that's like not that important to the company, the other stuff doesn't matter as much, unfortunately, because if the business doesn't have money to pay for stuff, then and they view it as like a supplementary role, then there's not going to be much leverage or kind of like huge need or urgency on the other side of the table. Second is opportunity cost. Likewise, as a hiring manager, if if my recruiting team is doing a good job, then I have 5 options to choose from, and ideally you're the best one, and I'm really excited about you. But if my second best option is also pretty good, then that's great for the company. And then third is, what is the value needed? Which, essentially, if you're talking to the hiring manager, like, what do they care about? And I'll just, I'll give you my secret. If you're ever interviewing with me or any company that I think should be thoughtful about their hiring, I just have 3 basic criteria. One is smart and competent, 2 is hardworking, and 3 is coachable. So any question thread or anything that we're talking about, if I'm talking to you and interviewing, like, it's probably I'm looking through one of these lenses to try to get like a read on that. So if we're asking about your past history of stuff that you've done, that's probably number 1. Number 2, if I ask you a question like, hey, what mistakes have you made? What's your weakness? That's number 3. If I ask you like, uh, given some project that happened, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently in the past? That's also like number 3 and a bit of number 1. So anything that I'm asking is usually something related to one of these 3 things. And that's sort of what I'm getting at. Okay. So that should help understand kind of the matching of your empathy with reality, to what extent your perspective matches their perspective in the world through their eyes. Lastly, there's kind of like the expert level of empathy, which is how do they view you? So your expectations, do like in the way that the candidate represents themselves, do they like, clearly convey that they understand like where they fit within my world? And one of the main ones is like, will they be grateful and work hard, or will they view this job as beneath them? Um, Someone who's kind of like interviewing up, so to speak, is going to be a super hard worker, and I know I can super rely on them to get the job done and follow things through and look through things in history and things like that. Someone who views this job as beneath them, maybe they went to like B school, their previous job was a VP, and now they're interviewing to be like a manager or something like that. I'm going to be really careful that to think through and ask them and try to figure out if they're going to view this job as beneath them, and then it's going to bring in like a bad attitude, no matter how competent they are. Second would be opportunity cost. So does the candidate understand like where I'm at, which is a reasonably advanced move on their part, and then what are their options? And that can lead to like, hey, maybe we're actually just objectively not a good fit for each other, or better said, maybe there's better options for both of us, and that's fine, right? And then third would be on the value side, like, does the candidate live the value and hiring criteria that I'm looking for, and do they credibly convey that? So that's just, in everything that you do when you're interacting with a job or with your partner or with friends or things like that, you're kind of, living these things. So the way in which you conduct yourself communicates as much as, maybe the words that you actually say or the content. So I think this is the meat and potatoes of what I thought about and kind of driving, how to drive alignment and a 1 level deeper of applying all the stuff that came before. So this is kind of what has ended up being useful for some other people before. So I thought I'd share it with you guys. At this point, that's pretty much it. I would remind you that the two fundamentals are you should make it so they obviously want to hire you, and their job should be they obviously want to accept. This is true in any counterparty sort of thing, right? Friends, hey, you want to be friends with people? Make it obvious that people should want to be friends with you. Do that by showing up with gifts, showing up willing to contribute, being nice and funny and jokes and stuff, right? Uh, that's all you can really do is kind of like attract people to you. Um, and then kind of the path, and if they don't accept, then that's their choice. Maybe their dog got killed this morning, or maybe something bad, it's like that's their choice, but you can't like force people. You can't force a job to take you, and you shouldn't want to. You can't force people to be your friends, and you shouldn't want to. And so the final thing is like the path to alignment. It's these three steps. You can always do this. Diagnose what your wants are, what you actually want. 2, try to see the world through their eyes. And then 3, work down through the interests and needs to try to align the interests of all parties. So with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions. And that's the substance of my presentation for today. All right, Michael, do you want to talk through a deal?
All right, let's talk through a deal. What do you want to talk through? So this is great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That you're having a hard time with.
I got a great one for you.
Okay.
Ready for this? So, yeah. and I'm trying to see it through his eyes. So I have a tenant who just moved into a place, and he kind of was there because he was an Airbnb tenant and he just wanted to stay. And I was like, fine. I was nice to him. I signed a lease. No, I really didn't want to, but I did anyways. And then last month, I gave him a 1 month, like I gave him like a little discount on rent, which was very, I felt like it was just a nice thing to do because the world was falling apart. The truth is, he's got like, he didn't lose any money. He's from out of the country. He has plenty of money. And right now he just feels like he doesn't want to pay the stated rent amount just because of the world situation. I told him, I'm happy to help anybody else that's hurting, anybody struggling. And he's just like, no, because the world's falling apart, you need to give me a discount. You need to give me what you gave me last time. And so my point is that we are stuck at this where I just don't want to give only because I'm being stubborn at this point. But the point is, like, I know exactly what he wants. He knows exactly what I want. And we're a little bit far apart. And we're just not coming to agreement.
Got it. That's a tricky one. I mean, understanding your BATNA is like your worst case scenario is he'll still pay you the discounted amount, and that's not the end of the world for you. You're just moderately annoyed by that.
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah. Actually coming from Mario most of all, but yes, that's true.
At least he's not paying you nothing, right?
Right. Unfortunately, I have no power. I don't have a security deposit. I don't have any, he's got furniture in there. And one of those things like he kind of holds all the power. He technically could stay in there forever and I couldn't get him out at this point. There's no eviction. Yeah. That's actually what I do worry about is like, if he I don't think the guy is actually a scumbag, but if he really wanted to, he could stay there and just live there for a while. And I have no power.
So I think one thing for you is doing your homework and whatever you can do to get to like have an alternative that doesn't suck. Because if he scorched earths you as you just described, you have no leverage, and that just sucks. So having some idea of in California, it's like impossible to evict people and everything's horrible and like whatever. But like you need to have a clear idea of what your worst case scenario is. So then you have something to work with on improving that. Okay, so I think that's a separate thing. I would guess that this dude would probably slippery slope it in that direction if he's taking advantage of you like little by little. So I'd have I'd do your homework on that side of things to see, where that aspect is. Now, that being said, where you're at today, like let's, you're in like somewhat like goodwill or something like that. It's like try to get it, what can he provide and what can be like useful around this. So one thing that could be useful would be like, okay, it totally sucks, but given your situation, be like, hey man, I understand this discount and like whatever, it sucks. Why don't you help me out? Could you like prepay for a year or prepay for 6 months at this discounted rate or something like that? I don't know like how much that it's, that's like cash flow versus income statement sort of stuff, but could be useful. Another thing you could think about would be, are there like non-financial things that he can do that would that would like either strengthen your position or trade off? Because oftentimes in salary negotiations or job stuff, there's stuff that you really care about but the company doesn't care about, and they're just really easy things that you can like get. This could be working from home 1 day a week. It can be some number of like being able to have a $5,000 budget for like professional training or like stuff like that. There's oftentimes like a bunch of stuff the other side doesn't value at all that you super value, that if you can figure those out, they can like chip them in. So I think I think the two things that matter most to you is, number one is like the stability of this income stream and like trying to do whatever you
Well,
can
it's
to
not, I
provide.
think it's a bigger picture item too. So
Yeah.
the world is, I mean, I'm an apartment building guy, and we all want to help people that are hurting right now. We understand there's a problem. We understand there's an issue, but there's going to be those people out there who literally have no problem, and they're just going to be like, we don't want to pay. And
Yeah.
that's what I see. That's why I say it's a bigger picture issue. Like, think about like very well income people that just decide not to pay rent,
Yeah. I mean, that like, look, that always could have been the case, right? Like people can just not pay rent and then it's like a contract and legal ramifications. Maybe we all need to reread the book. We were just rereading it with my girlfriend Yin, Give a Mouse a Cookie. I don't know if you guys have read it. You give a mouse a cookie, he'll ask you for a glass of milk. He asks you for a glass of milk, he'll ask for a napkin. He just like keeps asking for shit.
Yeah.
So
No good deed goes unpunished. That's all we've been talking about. You just give a little bit, and then they want the world.
yeah. So I think, it's where do you have your option? Where do you have your kind of like line in the sand that's enough said? What leverage do you have in kind of like discussing with them? But yeah, it's that's going to be like multiple tough conversations, sounds like. But you're my cousin, we can chat anytime. Does anybody else have any hopefully that was useful. Does anybody else have questions they want to ask? Otherwise we can talk about rent checks more.
That was a great presentation. I enjoyed that. I never had something like that before. But I'm actually taking a class. I'm just started it. It's on Coursera for negotiating right now.
I think
I think it's,
just one highlight I'd have on negotiation classes, because I've taken them too. One of the most common things that especially economists and theoretical people ask about, like pontificate about with negotiation, and it happens in like Prisoner's Dilemma and stuff like that, is like, when is it ever appropriate? When is it appropriate to lie? When is it appropriate to like go over your skis and overrepresent and lie and stuff like that? And from having lived life, I think on a personal basis, my answer is never. And then, but then I thought about like, why is that the case? And the main reason that that's the case, so I live in San Francisco, I work in tech, there's investors and stuff like that. One of the main things I'd say is that it's a small-ish community. So you end up doing repeat negotiations and repeat transactions with people. And in the case where stuff can get back to you, you should never lie, because it will, like, it always will come back. Like it always comes back, like no matter what. Then a second order one is like, what's the potential penalty that's associated with the lying or like something like that. But it's just like, I just think like life is much simpler, and it generally makes sense to do business with people that you want to do business with repeatedly. Like Mike, if this guy was like actually someone who could be a tenant in another place or provided recommendations, or you had other tenants that were his friends or like stuff like that, there's a web of implied trust and relationships there that will make this person less willing to be a dick to you. Sorry to curse. Um, so
I appreciate that.
that's one of the common ones, and like, you know, they'll have like the tit for tat strategy and these sort of things, and it's like, okay, when should I lie or when should I defect and stuff, and it's just like, it's never. It's like the only time you should do it is when, like, Benchmark did this with Uber. So Benchmark was early investors with Uber. They were, you know, supporters the whole time, and then Travis started having all this bad press about being a bad person and like stuff like that. And then finally, I think it was Bill Gurley. Like, so Benchmark, Bill Gurley, they were the guys who like went around to the board and got him fired. And Benchmark did the calculus internally, I would imagine, that they're like, we're going to make so much money off of getting him fired and just this Uber deal that even if we never make any money ever again as a VC firm, then it will be worth it. And I think that's pretty much the calculus that they did. And the firm's still doing like pretty well and stuff like that. But it's going to, that moment will be an eternal black mark on anybody, any entrepreneur, anybody who gets involved with that firm, because they did that. They did that. So that would be kind of like, you know, a high profile version of what, you know, just kind of like a very severe action that should always be remembered for anybody that does business with that firm. So
Good example.
so that's
Hey,
an
Jeremy.
example. Yeah. Hey.
Hi. I just saw your post and I jumped in.
Hey, what's up?
It's Sarah. Hi.
Oh, good to see you.
How you guys doing?
This is the V2 of this, and I'm sure there will be future versions of it as people ask of it. But, you know, here's my. We built it up, but there's this is the key to everything.
Negotiating?
Alignment. Yeah. It's like you shouldn't. I'm just like, the reason I think negotiation should be easy is that if people are like aligned and honest with each other, then it's just kind of like you just align with each other.
I have a tricky one right now. I don't know if you're taking questions.
I am. Go for it. And maybe who's the next presenter? I don't want to go too over. Okay. Could I do one more question, then I'll hand over the reins?
Go for it, man. Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So I do consulting, and I have a client who we met sort of informally. We've built up a lot of trust. The project is really hard to scope in advance because of the nature of it. And so we're kind of just jumping in with trust. And we did, you know, an initial contract that took that into account. And now we're talking about a real contract for a 3-month project that's likely to get extended. And the challenge is that, trying to think of the quick version of this. My rate that I usually charge, he's concerned about the optics of it, because there's an academic who's very, very, very influential in this project who's charging less. I don't know how much less, and is very senior and highly valued by the group that's ultimately paying for the bigger contract. And so it's this interesting situation where I haven't gotten any feedback that the rate is too high or that there's not a budget for it. It's more around, you know, how's it going to look if this person's making X and you're making Y?
I got it. I have a few thoughts, if I may.
Please.
So there's 2 typical ways that people will structure consulting or just any engagements. One is like outcome based. So it's like, you know, deliverables. And then second is like the cost plus, or like the hourly rate times hours sort of thing. There's pros and cons to both. The nice part about the outcome oriented is then both parties are aligned towards like driving to some outcome. The tricky part comes with like scope creep, when it's like it's hard to define exactly what the thing is at the beginning and like stuff like that. So that's that side. Cost plus makes sense because then it's just like, okay, the perverse incentive with that, which we see with consultants, lawyers, and all sorts of hourly rate people, is that that incentivizes people to do work slower and drag your feet, and it's not like outcome oriented. Like if you have hourly, you're in, you know, the inherent incentive of the system is to drag your feet. So what I try to do when I engage with folks on stuff is it's like outcome orient, like try to have like the outcome of what's trying to be defined of what the outcome is, and then bottom up build that with the hours times the hourly rate. And so in this case, the optics of your hourly rate being the problem, you know, what you essentially can say to the person is, and it depends on like how closely they want to track your hours and stuff and like whatever, but just be like, hey, broadly speaking, a 3-month engagement, and I think like monthly engagements are better too, because that gets around like hourly as well. And be like, hey, you know, like 3-month engagement, this such and such deliverables seems like it should be around 10K. And then I'll bill you on a weekly or monthly or week or like hourly or whatever it is. And we can say whatever those numbers want to be, because your job at this point, like your job is, you know, the job of pricing is to make it easy for the customer to pay and easy for them, just like easy for them. And if optics is a problem for them, then you can slice it up a little bit in some of the stuff that we're talking about here, to make it more palatable to this other person from an optics standpoint. So 3 months.
So what part would you say out loud?
Sorry?
What part would you say out loud to the person that you're negotiating with, where you have trust, they're telling you that the optics are the problem?
I think there's so what I would specifically say to the person is 3-month project seems to make sense. We should have 3 high-level bullet points of what the deliverables are for that, since we've earned a lot of trust and stuff like that. I'd be like a little careful because trust can wander out the door, but whatever. Okay, so like 3-month project, that seems like it's worth like X. Okay, let's back into X based on, you know, some time plus thing. Maybe like what's easiest for you? Like if it's 10 grand, then, you know, can you say like, hey, my monthly rate is like 3 grand or something. And if this helps a lot if it's like, you know, part-time. Sorry, the video is off. It helps if it's like part-time, or it helps if it's, you know, you're not like full-time straight up hourly, like per minute kind of like build. So yeah, rough agreement around what the 3-month thing should be, and then you can bottoms up it with whatever sort of flexibility that like, and then implicit in that conversation, they're just saying like what they need from an optics standpoint, and you're working with them to solve on that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the bonus minutes. And hopefully that was useful, Sarah.